Everyone knows the postcard story of World War I, a single pistol blast in Sarajevo, a royal heir slumps in an open car, telegrams fly, alliances click like clockwork, and a continent tumbles into trenches. That bumper sticker version blames a bullet. But what if the critical spark wasn't gunpowder at all? What if it was ink on ledger's credit, conjured in oak-paneled rooms from London to Paris to New York? A few banking houses stitched together loans worth billions in today's dollars, underwriting a local crisis until it swelled into an industrial slaughterhouse. And, yes, credit course to both sides. Stick around. By the end, you'll see why textbooks skate past the money trail, and how that wiring diagram still hums inside every modern sanction, bond issue, and bailout. By the way, if you love money, subscribe to the channel and give it a like. Now, let's continue Win the Reel back to 1914. Europe is volatile, loud, and proud. Newspapers trumpet nationalism. War ministries flex. The assassination lights the fuse, sure. Yet beneath the posters and speeches lies a harder engine. A financial arms race decades old. Empires gorged on colonies had stacked debts to the ceiling. The gold standard creaked beneath steel mills and shipyards. And the famous understandings were as much about credit lines as frontiers. Picture Britain and France, veteran empires with vast holdings in Africa and Asia, siphoning rubber, copper, cotton, oil fuel for Manchester's looms, and the foundries of the Loire. They're leveraged. Bonds piled upon bonds after each railway, canal, and policing expedition. Germany, the latecomer, is an industrial rocket that ran out of sky, scrambling for Ottoman concessions and Moroccan harbors to feed coal-hungry furnaces. Russia and Austria-Hungary, sprawling and brittle, borrow simply to keep their mosaics from cracking. Who keeps the plates spinning? Not only kings and kaisers. Think merchant banks, Rothschild, Baring, Morgan, and a ring of partners in the city and on Wall Street, quoting rates that rose with every rumor. By the eve of war, the global economy wore a rigid collar, gold convertibility. A pound, a mark, a franc. Promises of metal in a vault. When trade hiccuped, bullion sluiced across borders like water through cracked masonry. Great power rivalry wasn't only honor, it was cash flow. A British blockade in the North Sea didn't merely display dreadnoughts. It throttled German exports, froze letters of credit, and starved Berlin's banks. The deeper twist is simpler. The same financial rivalries that inflame politics also paid the bills. Morgan syndicates kept the Entente shopping for guns, nitrates, rails, and bread. Berlin clawed gold from allies to juggle reserves. Did the bankers know they were priming a catastrophe? Many said they were only doing business. The receipts tell a starker tale. Start at the roots. Empire wasn't a marble column romance. It was a margin hunt. In the late 19th century, the Congo, Egypt, Indochina, the Maghreb, whole regions were cut into concession maps. Britain hugged Egypt and South Africa for canals, cotton, and gold. France embedded administrators from Algiers to Hanoi for rubber and tin. Germany planted flags over Togo, Cameroon, and Southwest Africa, hoping phosphates and diamonds would vindicate the cost. Mills in Manchester, Lille, and the Ruhr exhaled coal dust without pause. Rails, boilers, rifles, and shells devoured inputs. Colonies promised captive markets and cheap labor. To construct the hardware of control, states borrowed. Jungles do not grow railroads by themselves. Forts, ports, and punitive expeditions ran on credit, often arranged by private houses that skimmed fees before the ink dried. Britain, champion of the global balance sheet, floated mountain ranges of bonds. The city's great houses hawked them with tea-time efficiency. Baring staggered after the Argentine crash, but stayed in the game. Rothschild's web linked Paris to Vienna and beyond. Morgan, eyeing the Atlantic as a narrow moat, kept ledgers ready for European business. These were not benevolent subscriptions. They were deals collateralized by customs, excises, and, at times, entire provincial tax farms. France's North African ventures entwined bankers with debt administrations that ran like cash registers in uniform. Germany felt the bind worst. The Reich, only unified in 1871, sprinted to catch up blue water fleets. Berlin to Baghdad rails, colonial garrisons, and its distant holdings struggled to pay. By 1913, liabilities spidered through the Reichsbank and private houses. Russia, meanwhile, drank deep from Parisian capital markets, billions of francs buying artillery and sleepers. leaving Petersburg tied to Paris by coupons more than treaties. Add pressure and watch the tower sway. Tariffs rose, retaliations followed. London's splendid isolation quietly meant squeezing German exports until bullion trickled out of Berlin. One poor harvest in India, one strike in the Rand, one failed bond auction, and credit cracked. These weren't side stories, they bred panic. Wilhelm II feared encirclement, yes, but insolvency stalked his margins. Markets reward turbulence with fees. The tenser the world, the sweeter the coupon. So, how did rivalry become annihilation? Enter the operating system, the gold standard. Since the 1870s, big economies pegged their notes to metal. Exchange rates stayed tidy. Bills settled smoothly until fear rose. Gold is stubbornly finite. Strikes, famines, saber-rattling. Each tugged bullion in or out. In 1914, Britain, greased by South African and Australian output, sat on deep reserves. Germany, after naval splurges and heavy industry, scraped thinner vaults. During the 1911 Agadir scare over Morocco, flows flipped, rates spiked, and credit dried on shop floors. Imagine a Berlin baker denied a loan because cruisers and battleships had soaked up national savings. This was not theory. It was bread, coal, and winter rent. Secrecy tightened the screws. Alliances were not only balcony photographs, they were clauses sealed in envelopes. Bismarck's 1887 reinsurance treaty promised conditional neutrality with Russia, hushed to placate Vienna. In 1915, the Treaty of London coaxed Italy with land and loans. A year later, Sykes-Picot penciled Ottoman spaces into zones like a prospectus for pipelines. Call it venture capital for conquest, co-signed by ministries and banks. Shut out of global markets after the guns began, Germany turned to its neighbor, financing Austria-Hungary, and vacuuming bullion from Vienna's vaults. By the final campaigns, Berlin held most of its allies' paper and a heavy share of its metal. Now, the pivot that bent a neutral giant. Enter J.P. Morgan Jr., Wall Street's conductor. From the first weeks of war, his firm acted as purchasing agent for the Allies. Rifles, shells, rails, trucks, canned beef procurement at continental scale, the commissions tidy and legal. In 1915 came the blockbuster. An Anglo-French loan floated in New York, then the largest foreign issue on record. Partners in London smoothed the pipeline. The city and Wall Street ran a transatlantic credit bridge. Why shoulder the risk? Because a German victory threatened a landslide of defaults that would crater books on both sides of the ocean. By 1916, Britain was carrying allies on its balance sheet. Italian deficits, French shortages, Russian gold drained into London's assay rooms. Private credit maxed out. Overseas holdings were pawned. Factories still screamed for steel and nitrates. Lobbying followed. Bankers reminded Washington that if the Allies fell, American exports and the loans greasing them would snap. Later committees subpoenaed ledgers and letters. The paper trail showed how credit braided into policy. Default here meant layoffs there. In 1917, the Republic marched yes for ideals, and also to protect a ledger now fused to national interest. Across the lines, Germany scrambled for counterweights, gold deals with Constantinople, huge credits to Vienna, clandestine shipments meant to keep reserves alive. The maneuvers backfired. Reichsbank notes ballooned, prices smoldered, central banks everywhere suspended the old metal rules. The newborn Federal Reserve joined European peers in sidelining convertibility. Fiat money rode to the front. Taxes paid a thin slice. The rest came from war bonds. Posters shouted for liberty and victory. Brass bands sold debt on courthouse steps. Grandmothers pinned bond receipts beside service flags. School children marched coins to classrooms. The language of sacrifice translated into interest payments. The money bought rifles and rails, and also spreads, fees, and commissions. None of this diminishes the courage at the front. It maps the engine room that kept convoys sailing. When the guns coughed into silence in November 1918, arithmetic did not produce peace. Versailles stapled reparations onto a shattered Germany, a demand impossible to meet in gold and poisonous to pay in paper. Savings dissolved, resentment bloomed, a demagogue found oxygen. The famous shot in Sarajevo remains a catalyst. The deeper contest unfolded in counting rooms where bars of metal outranked bars on a colonel's sleeve. We memorialize trenches, valor, and horror, The quieter tragedy is a clerk balancing columns while conscripts bled. The war-to-end war midwifed modern finance. Rothschilds and Morgans did not squeeze triggers, but their ink drew hard borders and long obligations. The echoes linger: reserve seizures, swap lines, emergency lending windows. Today's tools hewn with yesterday's logic. If this flips your timeline, say so. Drop a comment about the shadiest financial move you've spotted in recent conflicts, and subscribe if you want more history with the varnish stripped off. Stay curious, stay skeptical. History isn't over. It's underwritten. Let's ground the abstractions. The City of London kept world trade clearing even as panic brewed. When gold threatened to drain, the Bank of England hiked its discount rate to keep metal at home. That single number rippled through docks, warehouses, and mills, dependent on bills of exchange. A sheet of paper on Threadneedle Street could idle a loom in Leeds. Berlin attempted a rival discount market, but confidence compounds slowly. The clock ran out. Naval estimates climbed as Tirpitz challenged the Royal Navy. Steel that might have paved tram lines instead became armor. Interest that might have funded schools fattened coupons. Across the Atlantic, America played coy. The Federal Reserve opened in 1914 and watched Europe tear up convertibility within weeks. Bankers quietly admitted the obvious. Shells do not pause for gold shipments. Meanwhile, Midwestern grain and Appalachian coal rolled east. Copper and cotton filled holds. Morgan syndicates insured, financed, and settled. Neutrality? On paper. In practice, credit chose sides well before Congress did. Blockade policy had a balance sheet face. Cut nitrates, oil, and copper to Germany. Slow its factories, starve its banks, break its currency. If that sounds like modern sanctions, it's because the blueprint is old. Home fronts became auditors for the war's funding. Parades moved Liberty loans. Newspapers tracked subscription tallies like sports scores. Bond drives ritualized sacrifice and converted it into interest income for future years. Flip to the armistice. Reparations came packaged as justice and prudence, but they were also leverage for creditors. A beaten Germany owed sums unpayable in bullion, so the bill arrived in paper. Hyperinflation stalked the mark. Middle-class savings evaporated. Extremists harvested despair. Meanwhile, the same houses that financed empires reappeared to stabilize currencies in the 1920s, underwriting the next round of promises. The pattern hums: crisis, credit, consolidation. If your schoolbook told a clean tale of flags and alliances, scribble margins for discount windows, bond desks, and clearing banks. No caped villain masterminded the cataclysm. Systems reward habits, habits chase profit, profits harden into policy. Once money braided the fortunes of empires, a stray spark an archduke, a turn too soon on a city street, fell onto ledgers as dry as tinder. The smoke of 1914 is not only cordite, it's scorched paper. So when people talk about inevitability, remember the arithmetic beneath the anthems. Balance sheets box leaders into corners as tightly as treaties do. Raise rates or lose gold. Float bonds or ration food. Lift a blockade or bankrupt an ally. Those choices wrote the war's timetable as surely as any mobilization plan. And when you hear today about frozen reserves, emergency lending, or swap lines, recognize the tune. It's the old melody with digital instruments. That's why this story still matters. To avoid reruns, read past the famous gunshot and audit the books, because the ledger keeps echoing long after parades and speeches fade. One last lens before we close. Follow the plumbing of payments. Pre-war trade ran on acceptances. Short-term IOUs that greased cargoes of grain, rubber, and ore. London's bill brokers stood at the hub. Insurers priced voyages. Cables flashed rates across the Atlantic. When war came, governments did not build a new system from scratch. They hijacked the old one. The same clearinghouses that once settled coffee from Santos now prioritize shells for the Somme. Risk was socialized upward, even as profit stayed privatized. Which is why post-war politics felt like a ledger fight. Taxpayers asked why coupons stayed sacred, while wages and savings bled out. There's also the moral math. Bankers were not cartoon villains twirling mustaches. Many believed they were stabilizing an unruly world, smoothing exchange, dampening panics, keeping ships sailing. But incentives write behavior in invisible ink. If a premium can be earned on tension, tension arrives. If margins widen with war orders multiply. Nobody had to order a conspiracy. The structure rewarded escalation until the structure itself broke. And remember the technology of money. Telegraphs, undersea cables, and global quoting allowed credit to move faster than ministers could think. Audit the books. If you made it this far, drop a plus in the comments your badge for finishing the deep dive. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more long-form stories where money, history, and power collide. Curious about earlier empires of capital? Check out our others video.